What's up, everybody? Welcome to an overtime episode of Running Out the Clock. By now, you know how this drill goes. The clock has run out on our regular show for what we wanted to talk about with different topics. And so now we're taking a few extra minutes to talk about different things that interest us. As they say on TV, this is free football. You paid for the game, and now you're still there after 4 quarters. But that's a lie. We know it's not free. Concessions still cost. You still paid for the tickets, whatever. It's fine. So today, I am here. I am Chandler. I am our resident. I don't know what I am the resident of, but I am a resident of something. Yeah. And I've also got my good friend Keith, our resident Florida Gator expert. He only has the hottest and most up-to-date takes of Florida. So say hello, Keith.
Hello.
Yeah, so Keith is here. So tonight, whatever time it is, you might happen to be listening to this, we're going to discuss which teams in the SEC have the most to gain or lose if you're looking at it from kind of a long-term, say, next 5 years kind of track. Which teams have the most to gain or lose in this season? And so we're each going to pick a team from the East that we feel like has got the most to gain. We're going to pick a team from the West that's got the most to gain. Then we're going to pick a team from the East that's got the most to lose, and from the West has got the most to lose. So we could potentially be talking about 8 teams here. It's a lot of teams. Or maybe even more than that. I don't know. I'm confused. I've confused myself. Anyway, so
math is hard.
Yeah, math is impossible. It's the worst. So starting off with the East, Keith, this football season, which team in the East do you feel like has the most to gain going forward?
I think based off of last year and maybe like the previous 5 years, I would, at the risk of coming across as a homer, I think that Florida has the most room for growth and the most room for a long-term gain. That may sound weird, especially since prior to last year, they were in the SEC championship game 2 years in a row. Probably didn't deserve to be there. They played in a comically weak division, but their talent level just hadn't been up to where maybe Florida fans are used to. Last year was as close to an abject failure as you can get. They bring in Dan Mullen. They do have talent there. They had a good recruiting class this season. They've got a really good head start on the recruiting class for next year. They've got some good transfers coming in. And of course, this all depends on how the quarterback position develops, especially this year, but also next year. I think that they've got a lot of room to grow and potentially catch Kirby Smart and Georgia as kind of the top dog, no pun intended, in the East over the next 3, 4, 5 years.
And so, what do you think? What has to happen this season to make that gain? To kind of maximize on that gain.
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, and this should come as no surprise to literally anybody, but their quarterback play has to improve. They have to have consistency. Franks has a high ceiling. I think they have Emory Jones coming in, and he has a very high ceiling, and he kind of matches up more with the play style that Dan Mullen wants to install back at Florida. But I think that Franks is a really good player that can grow into Dan Mullen's offense and really help to kind of turn the team around. But we talked about this before. With Florida, the name of the game is consistency first, and then you can focus more on the explosive offense that Florida's used to having. And so I think that in order for Florida to kind of get back on track and I guess reach the cap that fans and head coach Dan Mullen thinks that they have, is for the quarterback position to grow, for wide receivers to actually be good wide receivers and catch balls, and to just be consistent. And obviously, staying healthy is a plus, which Florida's kind of had trouble with over the last several years. But I would say consistency at the positions that you need most, and then worry about the explosive nature of the offense going forward.
So do you feel like that's something that is reflected in, at the end of the year, is that reflected in a win total? Is that saying if they're you feel that way if they've got 9 or 10 wins, or is that more of a, even if the wins aren't necessarily there, if it's hey, we had consistent quarterback play, we you saw bits and pieces of that offense, it wasn't quite all together yet. I mean, kind of what is it that that kind of makes that work?
Yeah, and I'm gonna sound like a total coach here, but the process and your competitive level is way more indicative of success, I think, in my mind, than just pure numbers and wins. McElwain's first 2 years, they won 10 games and got to the SEC championship game, but they weren't a complete team. They were completely carried by their defense. I never felt good about the team going into the SEC championship game, or really good about them going into any game, but they found ways to win games, even though they maybe didn't deserve to win as many as they did. So, wins are nice, wins are great, and wins are oftentimes the bread and butter for how a coach survives. But
well, at the end of the day, that's the only way a coach survives.
Right. But I think you do have to look at the process to see how players and positions grow individually. And if Dan Mullen doesn't win 9 or 10 games this year, I don't think that's a failure. If they don't win 9 or 10 games and they looked as messy as they did last year, then yeah, absolutely. But if Franks grows into the quarterback position and plays smart, plays consistent, defense is good, offensive line moves the ball, Florida's going to have a tough schedule. So I don't think that looking back at the end of the year and seeing 10 or 9 wins is the measurement of success this year.
Well, and I think the talent is certainly there to win 9 or 10 games
sure.
if things fall right. And I think that's a good pick, because I think that Florida's been wandering in the wilderness for a little bit. Things have not gone, I think, after since Urban Meyer left, because of his heart issues, because he has those completely those heart issues. That's it.
That was definitely a thing, and not at all just a way to get out of a sinking ship.
Yeah, it was just, and we're so glad that his heart issues have recovered, and we just, all the thoughts and prayers for his mental issues now, his mental.
I mean, clearly,
amnesia.
He's an upstanding and honest guy.
Yeah, he's an upstanding and honest guy who just took some bad medication and had a brain lapse. But since he left, they've been really digging for something on offense, some sort of offensive identity. They haven't found it. So I think that's a good pick, and I think that honestly, that's the right answer. I'm going to say a different team just because it makes for more interesting podcasting if you pick different teams. Mm-hmm. But I think that's the right answer, because I think that for Florida to be able to show that they're on the right track, that everybody's got a lot of faith in Dan Mullen because of what he did at Mississippi State, and so yeah, I think that's the right answer. But I'm going to say South Carolina is the team that I think has got the most to gain long term, because I think that this season they've got a lot of expectations, they've got a lot of hype. There's just a lot going into the year, and I think that they could establish themselves as the second best team in the East this year. They've been good, and I think it looks like Will Muschamp has learned that you have to have offense to be a good football team, and it certainly seems like hey, look, everybody matures at different rates, right? Like sometimes you're out there just watching football and you don't understand that scoring points is what actually wins you games. But yeah, so and it seems like their recruiting is kind of right at a level that with a great season, if they were to win 10 or 11 games and establish themselves as kind of that number 2 team in the East, you could see the recruiting kind of kick up to the next level. And that's what you're going for. I mean, the recruiting kicks up, you're getting better players, and then I think they could potentially establish themselves as that number 2 team in the SEC East, and that'd be really good for them. Because South Carolina is a program that just in history has not been good, and they've got the potential, I think, this year to put themselves in a situation to be good for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I have a lot of thoughts about Will Muschamp, but yeah.
Hey, it's not Muschamp's fault. It's the athletics director who gave him the job before he was ready. True.
I guess that makes sense.
I blame Ed Ogeron for very little that happened when he was at Ole Miss. It's like there's that episode of The Office where Pam's like, you don't get mad at the 3-year-old who drives the car and wrecks it. You get mad at the adult who says, "Hey, kid, here are the keys."
Which is honestly a perfect analogy for Will Muschamp and his temper tantrums on the sideline.
So
basically,
let's
just the fact that he spent 3 years, crashing a car into a tree
repeatedly and couldn't figure out. It was just like reverse. Okay, I'm out of the tree. Drop, bam, reverse, bam, reverse, back and forth.
Spent 3 years Austin Powersing himself in between 2 trees.
That Austin Powers scene where he does like the 47-point turn. I've not thought about that movie in quite some time. So same question, SEC West. Who has the most to gain from this season?
I think we're gonna have the same answer here because we talked about it prior to the podcast, and I was thinking kind of the same thing. I think based on kind of what's happened in the West, Texas A&M has a lot of room to grow, and they've put a lot on the line by offering a 10-year contract for, what was it, $75 million to Jimbo Fisher. I mean, not that Kevin Sumlin did a terrible job, but they spent however long he was there finishing in the last half of the SEC West when there was a lot of room for several years there. While like Auburn was kind of down a little bit, State was finding its legs, and Arkansas was Brett Bieleming all over the field, and so there was some room there for aggressive expansion, I guess. And Kevin Sumlin just didn't do it, so they pulled the trigger on a proven coach, and there is some room to grow in the West. They have a lot of questions, but just purely from a standing standpoint, but they finished last year 4th, 5th.
Probably, I have no idea.
Yeah, I think it was 4th or 5th. So. Long term, they expect Jimbo Fisher to be competing for that 2nd and 3rd spot long term, and then
they expect him to be competing for the 1st spot.
Well,
$75 million is not second place money.
Well, true, but expectation versus reality in the seemingly unending era of Nick Saban.
That is very true.
That's a tough spot, but Nick Saban's reign has to come to an end at some point, and you would think that it would be fairly soon, given the fact that he's been there for 11 years now, 12 years now.
I think this is the 11th season.
Yeah, so he's been there for a while. He's won a lot of national championships. You would think that he would either call it a day or find some other program to pull out of out of the pit, you know?
Yeah.
So there's the expectation there. Texas A&M with how seemingly poorly some of the other Texas schools have been performing should do well recruiting in Texas, which is, as we all know, one of the best spots to recruit in the country. There's a lot of room to grow there.
Yeah, I think Texas A&M, you know, again, just like we said for Florida, I think Texas A&M is the right answer. You know, they could if they can come in and they can establish themselves this season and finish third, because they're not more talented than Alabama, they're not more talented than Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can make a case that they're more talented than anybody beyond those two teams. And so if you come out and you say, hey, you know, we've really got like we believe we've got a great coach. He finished third this year. That's not what we're expecting. That's not what we want. Mm-hmm. But he just came right in and took a program that we all thought could be this good and has proven that he's on the way to being this good. And I think that a key there is going to be that game in Starkville later this year. Because I think that's probably going to be the game that ends up deciding who finishes third and who finishes fourth in the mm-hmm. West. And I think that for them this season, I think that does look like a win total. I think that does look like needing to finish third, again, because you're not paying $7.5 million a year to finish third or worse.
Right.
And I know I've heard the comparison to Saban's first year, but Jimbo is apparently a good coach. We said this on our other episode. I think Jimbo's overrated, but people think he's great, but I don't see that level of either success in him that Saban has, where Saban could survive a loss to Louisiana Monroe, and I don't see the level of patience with the fans. Even though there's a lot of money on the hook there. I mean, again, it's $750 million. It's or $75 million. It's basically all guaranteed. So, I mean, there's like, if he gets fired, they've got to pay it. But it also seems like they just kind of print money with those Texas oil people. So the money's not going to be an issue. And so I think that they could really come out and say, hey, we know we're not there yet, but look at this SEC record. We finished third. We are, we're coming for you, Bama, Auburn, and it may take a recruiting class or two to do it. But I think if they can come out and kind of establish that level of just excitement and all that other kind of stuff, then I think it'll be good. Although, and again, this is going to contradict just about everything else that I've said on the podcast so far. I think LSU could really gain a lot this season, because I think if LSU can show that, it may not have been the most conventional hire. This may not have had the smoothest first year, mm-hmm. but if LSU can come out and they can play, because their defense is going to be great. Mm-hmm. And so if they can muster enough on the offense to finish in that top half of the SEC, when I think a lot of people are expecting them to finish bottom half. I mean, I've seen people predicting them last. I can't go that far because Arkansas exists in this timeline. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I could see LSU having a lot to gain by winning some big games this year. And because really, when there's excitement about LSU as a program, then their recruiting is just lights out. I mean, it's unbelievable. The kids who are the best players in the state of Louisiana, they don't leave. They mm-hmm. stay there in they stay there in Louisiana and go to Baton Rouge, and then they can kind of do the thing that Alabama does, where they just go to a school and say, okay, they don't recruit the players, they just go and pick the players. Like, hey, we want you, and you. And it happens. So if they could restore some excitement to that program, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if that looks like a win total, if that just looks like adequate quarterback play, if it just looks like Ed Ogeron, not beating up, a water boy or something. Or maybe it looks like him actually beating up a water boy. I don't know. Like whatever that looks like. I think if they can get some excitement back in the LSU program, then you're looking at a team that will kind of be back in the thick of things, just because the talent will continue to stay comparable with those other top teams.
Yeah, for sure.
So, taking it back to the East, what team do you think has got the most to lose this year?
So I was going to kind of piggyback off of your answer and say that it was actually going to be South Carolina. But I think taking into account this year and then, maybe the next 5 years or so, I think that the team that has the most to lose would be Georgia. And I say that because they had Mark Richt, who was the definition of a consistent coach. He always won 9 games. He was always a threat in the SEC East, but he was never a national threat. Mm-hmm. He was always good. He would almost always have a top 10 or like top 15 team, but that was his ceiling. So they made a move. They bring in Kirby Smart, and they almost instantly have national success. I mean, they win the SEC East. They're in the national title game. They lose to reigning overlords Alabama. So they've had Georgia fans have now had a taste of the honeypot. Yep. They are relevant again nationally in terms of recruitment. So what happens if Kirby Smart is sort of a one-hit wonder, and as players start to lose faith, things don't go well. Florida shows back up as a dominant team in the East again, and then let's not forget that Tennessee's going to turn it around at some point. It might be
no, they're not.
In 3 years. Not. It might be in 50 years.
No. The time of Tennessee's relevance is over. It's over. It's never happening again.
Well, me being one of the biggest Tennessee haters ever, I just can't see a world in which Tennessee falls off to like Vandy level and is just irrelevant in football forevermore.
So have you just not paid attention in the last like 8 years?
No, I have, and it's been delicious. It's been what has sustained me as a human being for the last 8 years or 10 years or whatever it's been since. Since they threw Philip Fulmer out.
Since this is our show, we do whatever we want. I'm just going to go ahead and explain why I think this. So Tennessee, like when Tennessee was good, when they were on top of the world, when they were kind of the elite program in the country, 1998, right? Mm-hmm. That's 20 years ago, and kids who are being recruited by Tennessee right now, like when they're like, oh, we won the 1998 national championship, we got Peyton Manning. Like they didn't even have Peyton Manning that year. We had T. Martin. Everybody's like, wait, who? All of the benefits that they had as a program in 1998, they don't have anymore. In 1998, there were only a handful of teams that were on TV every week. Tennessee happened to be one of them. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow night, we're going to be able to watch literally anybody we want. Saturday, we're going to be able to, like, if you decide that you want to pull up I don't even know, like teams I've never even heard of. If you decide on Friday night you want to watch high school football on ESPN, you can. So the exposure that you used to get by playing at Tennessee is gone. It's everybody gets it. They used to be like, oh, come to Tennessee and play in front of 100,000 fans. I've never heard a recruit say, well, Tennessee had 100,000 and this other team only had 93,000, so I went with 100,000. That doesn't matter. And B, so what? Everybody's got a 100,000 seat stadium now. I mean, and Neyland is a dump. Like, it's not even nice. So you got those two things. Like it used to be in Tennessee in 1998 was on the cutting edge of this, where Tennessee was building teams out of national players. while people in the South and the SEC were still largely recruiting Southeastern players, Tennessee's going out and getting guys from Texas and California and New Jersey and just kind of from all over the country. Well, guess what? Everybody does that now. Everybody's got access to those players now, and they're not going to Tennessee. And Tennessee itself, as a state, does not produce enough high school talent to maintain a championship caliber program. So maybe it's a little harsh to say that Tennessee's never going to be good again, but the recipe for success that they had in 1998, the factors for it just don't exist anymore. The playing field has been leveled, and I mean, if there are Tennessee fans that listen to this, I don't know if there are, but if there are, and I know this because I've had one-on-one conversations with them, like to suggest that, hey, you know what, Ole Miss might be a better job than Tennessee. It would give them a heart attack, but it's probably true.
Yeah. So two things that I want to get off my chest here. One of which is I forever despise you for turning me into a Tennessee apologist. And for some reason arguing that they're going to be good again at some
you
point.
Can stop because I'm right.
Second point is, if Boise State can come up with a shtick and recruit good players and become nationally relevant for a decade, I think anybody can. And just because Tennessee no longer has the advantage of being like a nationally recognized program, that doesn't mean that they can't get leadership and to like figure out ways to evolve from that. But anyway, and again, I despise ever talking positively about Tennessee.
Boise State is not a fair comparison because Boise State is playing teams like, Boise State only has to get up like 3 times a year at most, and that's if they make a bowl game. They might schedule a big out of conference team, but Tennessee has got to consistently on a week in and week out basis be better than Georgia, Florida, Alabama. That right there is 3 teams that they have no margin of error against, that all 3 are probably realistically going to have better talent than them. And sure. and then that also I don't like. I would love to do an episode just bashing Tennessee because
which is what we're currently doing.
Yeah, and that's fine. So I don't want to stay too long on this, but Boise State's not a good comparison there. But I don't know. I mean, you can say that they'll get the leadership in place to eventually do that, but their current athletics director is Phil Fulmer. So,
right, who just happens to be the last coach there who did anything nationally. So,
yeah, and that was 20 years ago.
It's true. Things have been terrible for a long time.
Anyway,
yeah.
So you're going with South Carolina as the team with the most.
No, Georgia.
That's right.
Yeah, and again, whether or not it's Tennessee or it's South Carolina that replaces Tennessee as kind of that third team in the East that is consistently good and dangerous. The East is not going to stay a soul-sucking void forever. Georgia's pulled in really good players. It's evident this year where they're expected to win a division and compete for another national title with a defense made up entirely of underclassmen. After losing 8 starters from last year. So they've got the talent, but if this talent doesn't pan out and somehow Kirby Smart loses control of the steering wheel and they fall back into that kind of Mark Richt era, it is not a huge failure objectively, but subjectively for Georgia fans, that's the worst case scenario. Is you're right back to where you started,
Yeah, no, and I hear that, but I think that when you look at the talent that Georgia's bringing in right now, and when you look at when you invest in a coach like Kirby Smart, and you're saying that we're investing in championships, Really what that means is we are stepping up our cheating efforts in recruiting, and Georgia will never get punished for that. And so, like, I think that this year, they take a step back, probably still win the East, but they take a step back, and then that's the last step back they take kind of for a while. So we'll see. I think Missouri has got a lot to lose this year.
Okay.
Because they're coming in, they've got a quarterback that is pretty universally loved. People think that he's going to be the next big player, that he could potentially be the number one overall pick. Mm-hmm. They've got some talent on offense, but I think that, after coming in and winning the SEC East 2 years in a row, their first 2 years in the SEC, I think there's kind of been this attitude of like, y'all don't belong here. Kind of with Missouri, and they don't. They're not in the Southeast,
right?
They're in the Midwest, and that's fine. I don't care about that. But there's this
somehow in the East Division, which like
they're the westernmost team. My show interns are very nervous by the thunderstorm right now. They do a lot of good work. Normally they do all my research for me, but they're scared of the storm, so they're not getting any work done. No, so there's already this attitude. Bo just put his head on my computer. There's already this attitude that Missouri doesn't belong, that they don't fit in, and so I think that people will just kind of look at them and be like, well, I mean, you guys just rolled the 5-7 with probably the best quarterback in school history, and maybe even the number one overall pick, and I think there's just a certain amount of credibility that could be permanently damaged. Not permanently, because nothing in college football is permanent, but there's a lot of credibility that could be damaged for a long time until Missouri makes wholesale changes. So I'll go with Missouri, although I think that South Carolina South Carolina is also the right answer to this question. But whatever.
Yeah, so, and like South Carolina is kind of sort of odd because they've never really been nationally relevant, and they got Steve Spurrier to come in, a historically great coach, and they won a lot of games, and here they are, nationally relevant.
Spurrier decided he wanted to quit.
Yeah, and so they bring a guy in who completely dumpstered Florida, and are like, again, listen, we saw you Austin Powers your car at Florida for 4 years. Here's some more keys to a different vehicle.
Yep.
So, but I guess moving back to the West, my pick for the program that has the most room to, I guess, take a step backwards would be LSU, and that may seem like a weird answer because, given the fact that they fired Les Miles and they hired Ed Orgeron, a lot of people think that they've pretty much hit rock bottom. But Orgeron proved last year that he could win with the club that he had. But if he comes in and proves that he hasn't learned from his time at Ole Miss and the programs that he's kind of followed around after, and he pulls what he did at Ole Miss at LSU, that's going to set them back tremendously, to the point to where maybe even lifelong LSU fans or kids that were brought up in Louisiana choose to go to La Tech or State or Ole Miss or USM or something like that. Their thing is that they've always been, well, not always, but like the past, probably 20 years, they've had a reputation as being a strong SEC school that recruits dominantly in Louisiana and regionally, and that they've always, just been a really tough team to play against. Elite defenses, good running backs, sometimes just spectacular wide receivers, and then you have Jamarcus Russell, who could sit on the ground and throw a football 500 yards.
Because in college football, how far you can throw sitting on the ground is relevant.
Yeah, super relevant.
Because it's like, great, you threw the ball 500 yards, but you were down. So,
yep.
Sucks to be you.
Yeah, but LSU fans hated Les Miles because he won a lot of games using Gator rituals, selling his soul to Satan.
He ate grass.
They just thought that the Mad Hatter over there. So if they hated Les Miles and Orgeron pulls an Orgeron from Ole Miss, they might actually burn the entire school down, not just like Death Valley and like athletic facilities, but the entire school.
Yep.
Baton Rouge may cease to become an actual town.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it might.
So, they've got a lot on the line with Orgeron. So it'll be interesting to see just how short of a leash they have on him.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot there as well, because when Orgeron goes, the athletic director is going to go too, because he's so this is the same athletic director that couldn't deliver on Jimbo Fisher, that had Tom Herman on the hook, and then ended up not getting him. And I think that's a great answer. I think that Mississippi State is kind of that team that has the most to lose, because there are some expectations, but they're tempered. I don't think anybody outside of the Golden Triangle in Mississippi thinks that they're going to compete for the SEC or anything like that. But I do think that there is there's this idea that Mississippi State has elevated itself to be kind of that team that's consistently in that third spot, maybe occasionally pushing for that second spot. And if you're in that spot where you're kind of second or third, all it takes is the 1 year with the one big play to win the West. So right. That's a good place that you want to be in if you're Mississippi State. But I also think that there are a lot more questions on their team this year than people are letting on. I don't really like their secondary or their depth at linebacker. Nick Fitzgerald has still got to prove he can throw the ball down the field. They've got to show me they've got wide receivers that can get separation, and they've got to show me that they've got an offensive line that can hold up against some of the better defensive lines in the SEC, because they got manhandled by Georgia and Auburn and even Ole Miss, who was bad on defense last year. Mm-hmm. So they've got to show some things there. And so I think that if they come out and they stumble this year and say they go closer to 7-5 than 10-2, because I think 10-2 is their ceiling and 7-5 is their floor. But if they go closer to 7-5 than 10-2, then it's going to be like, well, maybe Dan Mullen got all you can get out of that program, and some of the excitement and the momentum that has undeniably been built over the last 10 years, some of that starts to go away, and you kind of look at it and say, well, that's just them, returning to who they've always been, and the Mullen era was great, but now it's over. So I think that they've got a lot to lose, just kind of with momentum as a program as a whole.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing is the Mullen factor real? I think obviously yes, it is, because prior to him they were a middling program, but he comes in and
they weren't even a middling program prior to him.
Right. Well, they had some good Jackie Sherrill years, but the Kroom years were not great.
Yeah.
But Kroom, I think, was a necessary part to kind of changing the culture a little bit in the locker room to kind of pave the way for a guy like Mullen to come in. But obviously Mullen was a huge boon to the program. For crying out loud, like he took him to a number 1 national ranking for 4 or 5 weeks.
So funny story about that. have a student from here in Tuscaloosa who
Mm-hmm.
is a freshman at State now, and she said that during their like orientation weekend, they used that clip. They're like, we were number one in the country for 6 straight weeks or 8 or 5, however many weeks it was in 2014. And she texted her dad, who is like the biggest Alabama fan ever. And she was just, and she didn't even care about sports. She just was like, she's like, whatever. She was like, Dad, I don't even care about sports. And this is really funny. Like, so anyway, I think too, I think some of that is, I mean, that number one ranking was fool's gold. I don't mean that as trash talk necessarily. I mean that a little bit as trash talk, but they got beaten by Alabama, they got slapped by Ole Miss, and then they got crushed in their bowl game. And I think they actually did get crushed. It's not like Roe thought with Louisville, but I could be wrong. But they lost to Georgia Tech, and it wasn't a particularly close game. Now every time I say that a team got blown out, I'm going to be self-conscious because I'm going to remember Roe being like, "If you can even call it, it's like it was a 3-point game, dude." But no, I mean, regardless of any of that, and if you're a State person listening, hear me say this. Dan Mullen elevated the level of that program to whether or not, whatever you think about them being rated number one or whatever else, they were ranked number one.
Right.
That's not nothing. It's not as much as I think they make it out to be, but it's not nothing. And they've worked their way up to being a very, very respectable program, and a program that, some people might think they've maxed out their ability, but like I said, to be there consistently in that second, third range, you're 1 or 2 plays away some years from winning the West, and football's weird. It could happen. So,
and the year that they were ranked number one, they go into Bama. I think that was a really close game down to the wire.
It was.
I think they lost within like the last 5 or 6 minutes of the fourth quarter. It was a tough game. But State fans have to ask themselves, was it all really Dan Mullen, or did he lay the appropriate foundation to then have a coach come in and be successful off of what he did? I think that Joe Moorhead is a good hire. But the question is, can he build off of what Mullen built?
Well, can he build off of what Mullen built, and is he going to be a guy that sticks around for 10 years like Mullen did? Because I think that you can see some pretty interesting things. Like say hypothetically, LSU rolls a really bad season, they fire Oliva, they fire Ogeron, and they decide they want to go hire James Franklin from Penn State. And by all accounts, Penn State loves Joe Moorhead, and that feeling might be mutual. So, does he go back to Penn State if he gets a chance?
Right.
Even if he comes out, I mean, say he comes out and they look really good and something like that happens. Say State does go 10-2, and so they could stand to lose a lot by being really good too. So it like State I think is in a much weirder situation than it appears on the surface, just because it feels like it's this kind of fragile balance between like, well, they are who they've always been versus like that success over the last, and really all of Mullen's 10 years weren't great, but really the last 5 years, of Mullen, like after he got his program established and set up and all that kind of stuff, really, can we continue that? Even if we don't elevate that success, can we continue it? And I think taking a step back this season, when you consider how weak I think the SEC West is, and then kind of how good they seem to be, I think at that point you start to wonder, like, is he the right guy, and is our program taking a step back? So,
right.
Well, those were the teams. That's what we were talking about.
If you're listening, make sure that you give us a follow or hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to bringing you some more great, if not terrible, content in the near future.
Yes, because this is a very professional, well done podcast. And
Not a book. Yep.
we were very prepared for this discussion, so it was great. Thanks so much for listening. Again, I'm Chandler. He's Keith. Had a great time talking. Let us know. Hit us up on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. Let us know what you would love to hear an overtime episode about, and maybe we'll talk about it. So, have a great night. The clock has run out.
See you.